Some storms do not announce themselves. They do not rumble in from the horizon with dark clouds and thunder and the kind of warning that give you time to prepare. They arrive the way this one did, quietly, settling over everything like a decision that had already been made before anyone thought to ask. Frost Hollow was that kind of town, the kind where winter did not visit. It moved in. It unpacked its cold into every corner, pressed itself against every window, pulled the color out of the sky, and replaced it with a gray so complete and so still that some mornings it was hard to tell where the clouds ended and the world began. The road that ran through the center of town had gone pale and narrow, packed hard by weeks of boots and wagon wheels that no longer came as often as they used to. Trees stood stripped and honest along the edges, their bare branches lifted like arms that had given up asking for something and were simply waiting now. Even the sound was different here in the deep of winter. Every footstep was muffled, every breath visible. Every silence is heavier than the one before it. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Inside the Mercer house, winter had moved in too. The fire in the iron stove had burned low. Not dead, just exhausted, the way things get when they have been working too hard for too long without anyone noticing. Shadows leaned into the corners of the room. The smell of boiled beans hung in the air from a meal that had been made in the morning and not touched since. A clock on the wall near the door ticked, then paused, then ticked again, as if it too was unsure whether today deserved to be counted. 5 children occupied the room without speaking. Nora stood near the window, her forehead resting against the cold glass, her breath making small circles of fog that appeared and disappeared, appearing and disappearing, like a heartbeat she was trying to slow down. She was the oldest, 17 years old, and winter had already learned her name. The weight of being the oldest sat on her shoulders the way snow sits on branches. Quietly, completely, until something gives. She watched the road outside. Empty. She had been watching it for hours. Thomas sat at the kitchen table with his elbows planted on the wood and his hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles had gone white. He was 15, broad-shouldered already, with their father's jaw and their mother's silence. He kept staring at the same crack running through the center of the table, as if it might widen and give him something useful if he stared long enough. Clara knelt beside the stove, feeding small pieces of wood into the fire, even though it had not asked for more. She was 13 and careful with everything she did, as if the world around her was made of something fragile, and only she knew it. Every few moments, she wiped her hands on her skirt. They were already clean. Daniel leaned against the door frame with his coat still on and his boots still laced, all the way up, as if he had somewhere to be and was simply waiting for someone to tell him where. He was 11 years old, and he had not sat down since early morning. Some part of him believed, the way children believe things without being able to explain why, that if he stayed on his feet the day would not finish what it had started. And then there was little Sam, 6 years old, sitting on the floor near the base of the door where a thin line of frost had crept in through the gap at the bottom. He was tracing circles in it with one finger, whispering to it the way small children whisper to things when they're not sure who else is listening. Their father had left that morning to check the condition of the river. He had said he would be quick. He had said it the way he always said things he meant, plainly, without decoration. Winter had said nothing at all. Hours dissolved. Noon became something gray and shapeless. Afternoon lost its edges. The road outside remained empty, and the snow that fell across it was slow and deliberate, erasing even the idea of recent movement, covering the tracks her father had left when he walked away that morning until there was nothing left to show he had ever been there at all. Thomas broke first. He should have been back by now, he said. Nobody answered. Words felt dangerous the way a frozen river feels dangerous. You could not be sure what was solid and what was not until it was too late. Nora closed her eyes. Clara's hand stopped moving above the stove. Daniel shifted his weight against the door frame, but did not turn around. Sam stopped tracing his frost circles. Then came a knock. 3 slow taps. Measured. Patient. The knock of someone who already knew the door would open, who was simply being respectful about waiting. Daniel opened it. The cold rushed in immediately. Sharp and total, carrying snowflakes that drifted sideways on a breath of wind that smelled like distance and pine and something harder to name. Mr. Solomon stood on the threshold. He was a tall man, wrapped in a long dark coat with snow on the shoulders and snow in his gray beard and snow along the brim of his hat, as if winter had shaped itself into a person and then taught that person how to speak gently. His eyes moved once across the room, taking in the low fire, the untouched food, the 5 children arranged like a question that nobody wanted to be the one to answer. He removed his hat. "All of you," he said quietly. His voice was steady enough to hold the room together. "Come with me." The words landed differently than other words might have. They did not rush. They did not echo off the walls. They settled down into the floorboards and the spaces between breaths like snow settling on ground that had been waiting for it. Nora turned from the window. "Where?" Mr. Solomon did not answer immediately. He stepped fully inside and closed the door behind him, cutting the cold wind down to a murmur. Outside, the wind thumped once against the house, as if making one last argument, then moved on. "Outside," he said. "Then we will talk." Thomas stood so fast his chair scraped backward across the floor. "Is it our father?" The question cracked the air of the room like ice splitting. Mr. Solomon met his eyes without flinching. He did not reach for a softer version of what he had to say. He understood, the way people understand who have seen enough of the world, that some truths only cause more harm when they are blunted. "Yes," he said. The room changed. Not loudly. Not with the drama of breaking glass or slamming doors. It changed the way light changes when a cloud passes over the sun. Everything still there, everything the same, and yet nothing the same at all. Nora felt her knees soften beneath her, but she did not fall. She pressed one hand flat against the window glass and held herself upright through sheer will, through the particular stubbornness that oldest children develop when they have had to be strong for long enough that they have forgotten what it feels like to let someone else hold the weight. Clara made a sound that was not quite a word, something small and sharp that left her mouth before she could stop it, like a splinter working its way out. Daniel's hand slid slowly down the door frame behind him, his fingers dragging against the wood, needing something to hold on to. Thomas stared at the table crack. Then he looked up. His eyes were dry, but his face had the look of someone watching something they loved very much walking away from them and being unable to move their feet. Sam looked up from the floor with an expression that did not yet understand the specific shape of what had happened, but understood perfectly well that the room had changed and that the change was the kind you did not come back from. Mr. Solomon crouched down until he was level with Sam's face. His coat spread out around him on the floor. "You did not do anything wrong," he said gently. Sam nodded. He did not fully understand the words. He nodded anyway, the way small children nod when they sense that someone is trying very hard to be kind to them and they want to honor the effort. Coats were pulled on without anyone telling anyone to do it. Scars were wrapped. Gloves were fumbled with fingers that were not quite working properly. Nobody cried. Not yet. Winter had a way of saving that for later, for the quiet moments, for the dark hours when there was nothing left to do but feel. They stepped outside together. Snow had begun falling harder. Thick, unhurried flakes drifting down with no particular concern for anything below them. The road waited, pale and still. The town watched from behind frosted windows, pretending to look at other things. Nora reached for Thomas's hand. He took it without looking at her. Clara reached down for Sam. He tucked himself against her side immediately, pressing his small face into her coat. Daniel stood close enough to all of them that his shoulder touched someone's shoulder no matter which way he turned. This was how he held on, by not leaving space. Mr. Solomon led them down the road, his lantern swinging low and steady, his boots pressing deep prints into the snow ahead of them, a path to follow. Each step felt like crossing something invisible, like walking from one version of their lives into another one that did not yet have a shape. Winter walked beside them, listening, and somewhere ahead, the rest of the story waited to be found. I need you to stay with me right now, because what Mr. Solomon is about to tell these 5 children beside that river is the kind of thing that changes a person forever. If you have ever lost someone without warning, if you have ever stood in a room that used to feel safe and felt the floor shift beneath you, then you already know the feeling these children are carrying down that road. Keep listening, because this story is not about losing. It is about what 5 ordinary children choose to do with everything that loss leaves behind. Winter carried a different sound differently the moment they left the house. Footsteps did not crunch the way Sam expected them to. They whispered instead, as if the snow did not want to add any more weight to what was already being carried. Breath hung in the cold air longer than it should have, each small cloud of warmth leaving the body and dissolving slowly, reluctantly, into nothing. Mr. Solomon walked a few paces ahead of them, his lantern swinging in slow arcs that brushed light across fence posts and frozen weeds and the dark shapes of mailboxes that nobody checked anymore. The road sloped gently downward, away from the Mercer house, away from a morning that had been waiting all day for a man who was not going to come back to finish it. Grief needed silence before it could learn how to breathe. Nobody spoke. Sam's boots slipped on a patch of ice. Clara caught him by the back of his collar without thinking, pulling him close, and he tucked his face in her coat and stayed there, shaking in a way that made no sound, which is the saddest kind of shaking there is. Nora noticed how tightly Thomas was gripping her hand, hard enough to hurt. She did not pull away. The pain felt appropriate, like proof that they were still real, still here, still capable of feeling something other than the enormous hollow thing that was expanding in her chest with every step they took away from home. The river came into view gradually. Its dark surface was broken by uneven sheets of ice that had formed and cracked and reformed. The water underneath still moving, still insisting on itself beneath everything winter had tried to put on top of it. Snow dusted the edges softly, gently, the way snow touches things it does not intend to stay on. Mr. Solomon stopped. The lantern swung once more and went still. "This is where he fell," he said. The words did not echo. They did not need to. They were already everywhere. Nora felt something in her chest collapse inward, quietly, completely, like a wall that had been holding something back, finally giving way in the dark where nobody could see it go. Thomas's knees buckled. He would have gone down into the snow if Nora had not tightened her grip on his hand, anchoring him, anchoring herself by anchoring him, the two of them holding each other upright at the edge of the river where their father had stood that morning and not coming back from. Clara stared at the ice, at the cracks running through it like pale scars, at the place where the surface had given way and then frozen back over, imperfect, guilty looking. Daniel stepped forward without meaning to, his boots stopping at the very edge of the bank, his face doing something complicated that he was too young to have words for and too old to simply cry about. Sam looked up at Mr. Solomon. "Did he slip?" Sam asked. Mr. Solomon crouched down again, his coat spreading in the snow. The ice gave way beneath him. He said gently. He tried to pull himself out. "Did he call for help?" Sam asked. Mr. Solomon paused just long enough for the truth to find the right door. "He did," he said, but there was no one close enough to hear. Sam pressed his mittened hands together and looked at the river for a long moment. He was 6 years old, and he was trying to put something into a place inside himself that was too small for it. And watching him try was the most heartbreaking thing any of the older siblings had ever seen. Nora finally spoke. Her voice sounded older than it had that morning. "You found him?" "Yes." "Was he alone?" Mr. Solomon looked at the river, then back at her. He was not thinking about himself, he said. He was trying to get back toward town. "Toward you." Thomas made a sound then that was not a sob and not a word and not a breath. It was something that had no name. He turned his face away into the cold, and his shoulders shook and nobody touched him, because sometimes the only thing you can do for someone is give them the space to feel what they are feeling without trying to make it smaller. The wind moved across the river, carrying cold with it, dragging it across their faces like a hand that did not know its own strength. "What happens now?" Clara asked. Her voice was thin, steady, but thin, the way thread is thin when it is holding more weight than it was made for. Mr. Solomon stood. Snow clung to his knees. "That," he said, "is why I asked you to come with me. Stay with me. Part 2 is where these 5 children find out what their father left behind for them. And it is not what any of them expected." They followed Mr. Solomon along the riverbank, past the place where the ice had broken and refrozen. past a stand of reeds bent stiff with frost, their thin stalks rattling faintly against each other in the wind like something trying to speak in a language that had no words left. The lantern bobbed ahead of them, a small determined circle of warmth in the wide dark of the afternoon. As they walked, Mr. Solomon spoke, not in speeches, not all at once, in steady, careful waves, the way someone speaks when they know that what they are carrying is heavy and they need to set it down slowly or it will break something on the way. Your father knew winter, he said, not just the cold of it, the kind of winter that comes when people leave. When the ones who held things together are suddenly gone and everything that depended on them has to figure out a new way to stand. Nora's heart pulled tight in her chest. He never said anything about this, she said, about planning, about what would happen if. Sometimes, Mr. Solomon replied, saying it out loud makes it heavier. Some men carry the weight of their love in silence, because they do not know another way to carry it. They reached the edge of town, where the road widened briefly before narrowing again into itself. A low building sat at the corner, its windows lit with warm yellow light, smoke rising straight and steady from the chimney. Not a church, not quite a meeting hall, just a place that existed for the moments when things could not happen anywhere else. Inside, warmth pressed against them all at once, immediate and almost overwhelming after the cold. The air smelled of old wood and paper and coffee that had been sitting on a stove longer than was strictly advisable. They gathered around a table that had seen many difficult conversations. Mr. Solomon sat across from them and removed his gloves slowly, carefully, each finger one at a time, as if this part of the evening deserved to be handled with care. He set a stack of papers on the table between them. Your father came to me after the first freeze, he said. He asked me questions. Hard ones. Thomas stared at the papers. About us? Yes. Nora swallowed. Why would he do that? Mr. Solomon looked at each of them in turn. 5 faces in the lamplight. 5 pairs of eyes that were trying very hard to be brave about something that did not require bravery so much as it required endurance. Because loving someone means planning for the days you cannot be there, he said. Because a man who loves his children does not leave their future to chance if he can help it. Your father could not know when winter would come for him, but he knew it would come for all of us eventually, and he wanted to be ready. Clara looked at the papers the way you look at something you're not sure you want to touch. Are those, she started, adoption papers? Arrangements, Mr. Solomon said gently. Daniel leaned forward. We stay together. It was not a question. It was the first thing he had said with full force behind it since the knock at the door that afternoon, and the certainty in his 11-year-old voice made Mr. Solomon look at him with something that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. That was his condition, Mr. Solomon said. His only one. All 5 of you together. He would not agree to any arrangement that separated any of you from the others. 5 children. One condition. All together or nothing at all. Their father had been gone since morning, and he was already taking care of them from the other side of whatever winter had done to him. If that does not make your throat tighten, then I do not know what will. Stay with me, because what Mr. Solomon says next is the part that changes everything for these children, and you need to hear it. The room went very still, the kind of stillness that is not empty but full of the weight of what had just been said and what it meant and all the different ways it could have gone if their father had been a different kind of man. Nora closed her eyes. When she opened them, tears slipped free. Quietly, without drama, the way tears fall when you have been holding them back for so long that they have simply run out of patience. They fell down her face, and she did not wipe them away. She let them go because there are some moments that deserve to be wet with grief, and this was one of them. There is family to the south, Mr. Solomon continued. Distant relations. A couple with a house large enough and a willingness that your father trusted. They have agreed to take all 5 of you, together, under one roof. They have given their word. Jonah, Thomas said, and then he stopped. He was asking the question that all of them were asking, the question beneath the question. And if we do not go? The wind rattled the window panes. Once hard like a fist. Then winter decides for you, Mr. Solomon said softly. They looked at one another around the table, not as 5 separate people navigating 5 separate griefs, but as something that had been shaped by the same hands, held together by the same love, bound by the same loss. Nora felt the weight of all of them settle onto her shoulders, and she did not shrug it off this time. She did not try to put it down or redistribute it or pretend she could not feel it. She took a breath. "We go," she said. Thomas nodded immediately. Clara squeezed Sam's hand under the table, and Sam looked up at her with his serious little face, too young to understand the full shape of what had just been decided and old enough to feel the rightness of it in his chest. Daniel exhaled slowly, the long, careful breath of someone who has been holding something in since morning and has finally been given permission to let it out. Mr. Solomon gathered the papers back into a neat stack. "Then we leave before dawn," he said. Outside, winter was still there, still listening at the windows, still pressing its cold hands against every gap it could find. But for the first time since the knock at the door that afternoon, it did not feel like it was winning. They slept very little that night. The building held warmth, but not rest. Sleep came in fragments, short and startled and incomplete, like sentences that kept getting interrupted before they could find their endings. Nora sat upright in a chair long after the others had drifted into their shallow, fitful versions of sleep. Her mind paced back and forth the way it always did when there was too much to hold and nowhere to put it. Thomas lay on the floor with his arm thrown over his eyes, counting his own breaths. Daniel stood near the window for most of the night, watching the snow fall sideways, as if he could change its direction by watching it closely enough. Clara stayed awake long after she might have slept, watching Sam breathe, counting the rise and fall of his small chest the way people count things when the world feels too large and uncertain, and they need something simple and real to hold on to. Mr. Solomon did not sleep. He sat in the corner with his coat across his knees and his eyes open in the particular stillness of a person who has made a promise and intends to keep it through whatever the night brings. Dawn came without ceremony, a thinning of dark, a slow easing of shadow. Winter mornings did not waste time on beauty. They simply continued. The wagon waited near the road when they stepped outside. Old but solid, its wooden sides marked by other winters it had carried people through. Mr. Solomon moved with quiet efficiency, loading their few bags, tying blankets over the sides, checking the wheels the way a person checks things when they understand that carefulness is a form of love. "Sit close," he said. "Share warmth." They did. Nora settled in the middle without deciding to. Thomas Preston on her left, Clara on her right. Daniel took the outer edge, his back straight, his shoulders set, as if he could protect the others from the wind simply by positioning himself between them and it. Sam folded himself into the remaining space, knees tucked up, eyes already growing heavy again. The wagon lurched forward. Frost Hollow slid away behind them. The road stretched long and pale ahead, bending south through fields buried under white. Fences disappeared beneath snowdrifts. Trees stood along the edges like witnesses to a leaving they had seen before and would see again, patient and bare and entirely without judgment. For a long while, no one spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that holds people together rather than pushing them apart. The silence of 5 people who had run out of words but had not run out of each other. After a while, Mr. Solomon spoke, not to fill the quiet but to offer something into it. "Your father came to see me on a night like this one," he said, "cold enough that your breath came out in pieces." He sat right where Daniel is sitting now. Daniel looked up. "He asked me what happens to families when one piece goes missing," Mr. Solomon continued. "Not the legal part of it, the human part. What happens to people when someone they loved and depended on is suddenly not there anymore." Thomas swallowed. "What did you tell him?" "That they either scatter," Mr. Solomon said, "or they learn a new shape." Clara frowned gently. "A shape? Like ice on a river," he replied. "When it cracks, it does not disappear. It reforms, thicker in some places, thinner in others, but still holding, still covering the water, still doing the thing it was made to do, just differently than it did it before." The wagon creaked as it climbed a low rise. The wind picked up, threading itself through every gap in the blankets. Daniel spoke. "What if we break?" Mr. Solomon did not turn around. Then you break together, he said. That matters more than people think. The words settled into the cold air around them and stayed there, the way certain things stay when they're true enough to hold their own weight. Stay close. Part 3 is coming, and it is going to ask everything these children have left. The storm came in the middle of the day. Not suddenly. It had been building since morning, gathering itself in the gray above them, waiting for the right moment. Snow began falling thicker, faster, the flakes no longer drifting but driven sideways, with a purpose that felt almost personal. The road disappeared, not gradually, not in pieces. It simply stopped being visible, erased by white, and what had been a clear direction forward became a matter of faith and the steady movement of the horse and Mr. Solomon's hands on the reins. The wind howled low and long, not angry exactly, but absolutely determined. The wagon jolted hard. Clara gasped. Daniel grabbed the side with both hands. Sam woke up with a small sound of alarm. Mr. Solomon pulled the reins back hard. "Stay," he said, and was already jumping down before the word had finished leaving his mouth. The wheel had caught in a deep drift, the axle straining against it, the wood groaning with the effort of resisting something it could not push back. Mr. Solomon worked with his hands bare, his gloves tucked into his belt, because gloves slowed him down, and this did not allow for being slow. His hands went red almost immediately. His breath came out in hard bursts. The wind tore at everything, at his coat, at the blankets, at the edges of all the things that were trying to stay together. Inside the wagon, the 5 siblings did what people do in the dark when they are frightened, and there is nothing practical to do with the fear. They moved toward each other. Nora wrapped both arms around Sam, pulling him into her chest. Thomas leaned forward and pressed his shoulder into Daniel's, adding his weight like a buttress against a wall. Clara tucked her head down between her knees and breathed deliberately, one breath, then another, because the breathing was something she could control, and she needed very much to control something. The wind was all there was for a long moment, cold and loud and entirely indifferent to any of them. Then the wheel shifted. A crack, a groan, the sound of something giving way in the right direction for once. Mr. Solomon straightened, chest heaving, breath coming ragged. He climbed back onto the wagon seat with snow caked from his knees to his collar, his beard white with it, his eyes streaming from the cold. "All right," he said. "We move now." And they did. 5 children in a storm with a broken wheel and nothing but each other and one man who promised their father he would get them through. Have you ever been in the middle of something that felt completely impossible and found out that the only way through was the people beside you? That is exactly where these children are right now. Do not go anywhere. What happens next is the moment this family decides what it is made of. Thomas began to hum. It started quietly, without announcement, without self-consciousness. A low and rough melody, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind, something their father had sung on winter evenings when the power went out and the house went dark, and the only light was what they made between them. Nora recognized it before she understood what she was hearing. And then her voice joined, without deciding to, the way breathing joins when you have been apart from someone and find yourself breathing the same air again. Clara followed. Softer, careful, like a person trying a door they're not sure will hold their weight. Even Daniel added something, barely audible, a low thread of harmony that he seemed to be producing from somewhere deep and involuntary, a place that had not been touched by the terrible morning and the cold afternoon, a place that was still just himself. Mr. Solomon did not turn around, but his grip on the reins eased. They sang through the worst of the storm, not beautifully, not together in the way trained voices are together in the way people are together when they're surviving something, and the sound they are making is less about music and more about refusing to go quiet. The wind tried to take it. They gave it more. By the time the storm thinned and the road reappeared beneath them, pale and possible, they had stopped singing without noticing they had stopped. The quiet that followed was a different kind of quiet than the one before the song. Warmer, less empty. Mr. Solomon slowed the wagon as the afternoon light began to fail. "We will rest soon," he said. His voice was gentler than it had been all day. Nora nodded. Her chest ached in a way she did not have a clean name for. Leaving hurt. Staying would have hurt too. Winter had not given them a choice that did not have pain attached to it. But they were still moving, still together, still here. And sometimes that is all surviving means. They stopped just before the light failed completely. A stand of pine trees rose to the east, dense and dark, the kind of trees that have been standing through many winters and have opinions about it. Mr. Solomon turned the wagon off the road and into the shelter of them, the wheels pressing through fresh snow, the trees closing around them gradually until the worst of the wind was reduced to a murmur somewhere above. The forest smelled of cold and pine and something else, something older and quieter, the smell of things that had endured. "Here," Mr. Solomon said. "We wait out the night." The sky above was already bruising toward purple, darkness coming down fast the way it does in deep winter, without lingering at the edges. The 5 siblings climbed down stiffly, boots crunching, legs unsteady after the long day in the wagon. Mr. Solomon worked quickly. Blankets off the sides. A fire pit cleared in the snow. "Isaac, Daniel, with me," he said, and the boys moved to help without hesitation. The fire was difficult. The wood was damp. Wind found gaps in the shelter of the trees and stole the flame before it could catch. Mr. Solomon crouched low over it, striking flint again and again, shielding the small attempts at warmth with his body, breathing on them gently, coaxing. In the orange flicker of the struggling fire, Sam's face was very small and very serious. Clara sat beside him, rubbing his arms through his coat. "It is okay," she whispered. "It is cold," Sam said. "Yes," Nora said from his other side. "But cold does not mean alone." Sam considered this with the focused gravity of a small child absorbing something important. Then he nodded and leaned into Clara's side and closed his eyes. The fire caught, weak and tentative at first, then stronger, steadier, throwing light into the dark spaces between the trees and pushing winter back by the width of a breath. They ate in small bites. Hard bread, a little of what was left from the morning. Not enough, but enough to keep going, which is the only kind of enough that winter offers. Sometime in the deepest hour of the night, when the world had gone completely quiet and the storm had pulled itself back to reconsider its position, Thomas spoke. "I keep thinking," he said. His voice was barely above the crackle of the fire. "If we had gone with him that morning, if one of us had been there." Nora stiffened. "I know," Thomas said quickly. "I know there is nothing to be done with it. But my mind keeps going there. In circles. The same place, over and over." "Mine too," Clara said softly. Daniel looked at the fire. Mr. Solomon poked at the embers, sending a brief shower of sparks into the dark above them. "That path is endless," he said, "and it leads nowhere that feeds you." Thomas frowned. "So what do we do with it?" "You let it pass," Mr. Solomon replied, "the way you let a wave pass. You do not fight it. You do not follow it. You feel it come, and you feel it go, and you do not go with it. Does that work?" Clara asked. "No," he said honestly. "Not always. But it hurts less than the other way." The silence that followed was full of the sound of the fire and the soft presence of the wind in the trees, and 5 young people sitting in the dark with something enormous and trying, as best they could, to let it pass through them without being swept away. The attack of the storm came back before morning. A crack from somewhere in the dark. Then another. "Isaac," Daniel's eyes snapped open. "What was that?" The forest answered with a deep hollow groan as a branch overhead gave way under the weight of accumulated snow, crashing down somewhere deeper among the trees in a sound that made Sam cry out softly and press himself hard against Nora's side. "It is the trees," Mr. Solomon said, already on his feet, winter shifting its weight. But even as he said it, the wind came back harder than before, slicing through the shelter of the pines, finding the fire, threatening to take it. The embers dimmed. Nora felt panic climb her ribs. Then Thomas did something. Without being told, without thinking about it, he stepped forward and shrugged off his coat and held it up with both arms like a wall between the wind and the fire. The cold hit him immediately, through his shirt, through his skin, and he did not move. Daniel stepped up beside him, shoulder to shoulder, adding his own body to the barrier. Clara came from the other side, pulling her scarf loose and holding it stretched between her hands. Nora looked at them. 3 children standing in a ring around a failing fire in the dark, using themselves as shelter. She stepped in beside Clara. Sam looked at all of them, then scrambled to his feet and pressed himself into the small space between Nora and Thomas, tucking his little body into the wall they were making, adding what he had, which was not much, but was everything he had. Mr. Solomon crouched inside the circle they had made around him and struck the flint. Once, twice, 3 times. The flame caught. Small, fragile, completely real. He fed it carefully, one careful piece of wood at a time, breathing around it gently, and it grew. It grew until it was strong enough to hold itself up without help, until it was throwing light back into the trees and warmth into the circle of 5 children who had made themselves into a wall so it could survive. The fire flared. Sam let out a breath that he had been holding for what felt like hours. "We did it," he said. "Yes," Mr. Solomon said quietly. "You did." They settled back around the fire, closer than before. Coats were shared. Warmth was redistributed with the practicality of people who have learned that what belongs to one of them belongs to all of them. Nobody spoke for a long time. In the deepest part of that night, when the storm had finally exhausted itself and the snow was falling gently again, the way it falls when it has given up trying to hurt anything, Nora woke to find Daniel awake beside her, staring into the dark. "Are you all right?" she whispered. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think so." She hesitated. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "Be everything they need. Be what he was." Daniel turned to look at her. His face in the firelight was young and tired and completely earnest. "You do not have to be what he was," he said. "You just have to be what you are. And you do not have to do even that alone." Above them, the trees stood quiet. The wind had finally rested. Winter had done its worst tonight and found them still here. Still together. Still burning. Part 4 is coming. And it begins in the morning. Not rescue. Not a miracle. Just the simple, stubborn fact of still being here. Morning came the way survival usually comes. Without announcement. Without particular warmth. Without the dramatic colors of a sunrise that had decided to make a point. Just a slow leaking of gray into the dark. A thinning of shadow. A gradual increase in the visibility of things. The fire had burned itself to coals. Steady and red in the pale morning, a heart that had refused to quit even while everything around it slept. Nora was the first one awake. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then the smell of pine hit her, the cold against her cheek, the weight of Sam against her side, his small body warm and deeply, completely asleep in the way small children sleep when they have exhausted themselves all the way down to the bottom of themselves. She stayed very still and let the morning settle around her. Daniel was sitting where he had been when she last saw him, his eyes red but open, watching the tree line. He looked at her when she stirred and nodded once. The nod of someone who had kept watch through the night and was reporting that the world was still intact. In the morning, he whispered. She almost smiled at the word. Almost. Thomas groaned himself awake, stretching limbs that had stiffened in the cold. "Did we make it?" "We're still here," Clara said, opening her eyes. "That counts." "That is the whole thing," Thomas replied. And there was something in his voice that was not quite lightness and not quite grief, and was exactly what you find in people who have been through something terrible together and are on the other side of the worst of it. Mr. Solomon rose last, unfolding himself from the edge of the fire pit. He looked older in the morning light. The lines of his face are more visible, but steadier too, like someone who had kept their promise through the night and found the world still worth keeping promises in. He set water on the coals. Steam rose, thin and present. They drank without rushing. Winter had taught them the value of not hurrying through the moments that were still good. When they packed up the camp, something had changed. Not dramatically. Not in the way things change in stories, where a single moment transforms everything. In the quiet way that people change after they have gotten through something they were not sure they would get through. Their movements were sure. Hands reached without hesitation. They adjusted each other's coats and handed things to each other and took things from each other without being asked. Sam handed Clara a glove that had fallen from her pocket without her noticing. She took it without making a production of it. Just took it. The wagon rolled forward into a morning that was cold but clear, the snow from last night's storm lying fresh and unmarked ahead of them. The sky a pale washed blue above the tree line. As they traveled, the land began to change. The trees thinned. The air warmed a degree, then another. Snow clung less desperately to branches, falling free in small, soft cascades. Somewhere in the distance, water moved, still cold, but alive. Nora felt something shift inside her. Not healed, not fixed, something looser, something that had been locked tight for so many hours began to consider the possibility of opening. Tell me in the comments. And if you have dealt with something similar, share your story. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. By midday, they reached the settlement. It was not large. Tucked between low hills, smoke rising steadily and domestically from several chimneys. The sound of ordinary life moving forward with the particular determination of places that have learned not to ask winter's permission. Mr. Solomon slowed the wagon. "This is where I leave you," he said. The words fell heavier than Nora expected. They all felt it, the sudden weight of them, the specific shape of another leaving before they had finished absorbing the last one. Thomas frowned. "You're not staying." Mr. Solomon shook his head gently. "I was meant to bring you here," he said. "Not to stay." Sam climbed down from the wagon before anyone could think about it or organize it or make it into a moment. He simply climbed down and stood in front of Mr. Solomon in the snow, small and serious and absolutely direct. "Thank you," he said. Mr. Solomon crouched. Snow soaked into his coat at the knees. His eyes were very kind. "You're welcome," he said. "All of you." Nora stepped forward. She had been composing things to say in her head all morning. Full sentences, organized thoughts, ways of expressing something that felt too large for words. Every one of them dissolved the moment she opened her mouth. "You did not have to do this," she said instead. "Yes," he replied simply. "I did." Daniel extended his hand. Mr. Solomon took it. The grip was firm and long and said everything that neither of them could find words for. Clara hugged him quickly, fiercely, and then stepped back before the weight of the feeling could tip her over. Thomas nodded. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright. "You made a difference," he said. "That is all. Just that." Mr. Solomon smiled. "Not wide, not bright. Real. Winter always asks something of us," he said. "You answered it together. That is the rarest thing I know." He climbed back onto the wagon seat. He picked up the reins. For a moment he paused, and there was something in the pause that felt like all the things he had carried through this with him. The weight of the promise he had made to their father, the weight of the night in the forest, the weight of the river and the papers and the questions these 5 children had asked him that he had answered as honestly as he could. "All of you," he said one last time. His voice was softer now. "Keep moving together." Then he was gone. The wagon's sound faded down the road. The snow covered his tracks almost immediately. 5 children stood in the winter light and watched the road until there was nothing left to watch. Sam reached for Nora's hand. Thomas reached for Clara's. Daniel stood close enough that his shoulder touched both of theirs. They were taken in slowly, carefully, with the particular gentleness of people who had been told what these children were carrying and had decided that the most important thing was to carry it alongside them rather than try to take it away. The house was not large. It was not perfect, but it was warm and it held all of them under one roof without dividing them, without asking any of them to be anywhere other than where they were. That night, they slept under a roof that was not theirs yet, but it held. Part 5 is the last part, and it is the one I most need you to hear. Days passed, then weeks. Winter did not leave all at once. It never does. It retreated inch by inch, begrudgingly, the way things retreat when they have been somewhere long enough to believe they belong there. Snow melted into mud. Ice thinned along the edges of things. The river they had stood beside in shock and grief began to move again, cautiously at first, and then with more confidence, pushing against its remaining ice the way living things push against whatever has been trying to hold them still. The 5 Mercer children learned the rhythms of a new house. New sounds in the mornings, new smells from a different kitchen, new creaks in the floorboards. New ways the light came through windows that faced different directions than the ones at home. These things were small and constant, and sometimes, without warning, they would hit one of them sideways in the middle of an ordinary moment, not with the full force of grief, but with its quiet cousin, the low ache of absence, the particular tenderness of a wound that is healing but has not finished yet. Nora learned, slowly and with some resistance, how to rest without the world ending. She had been a guard for so long that standing down felt dangerous, felt like failing, felt like the moment she stopped watching was the moment something terrible would happen to the one she loved. It took weeks of nothing terrible happening before her body began to believe that rest was not the same as abandonment. Thomas learned that silence did not have to mean blame. He had spent the first days after the river carrying a quiet so heavy it bent him, turning every memory of that morning into a question he could not answer. Mr. Solomon's words came back to him slowly, like a tide coming in. The thought passes like a wave. You let it pass. It does not always work, but it hurts less than the other way. He practiced letting it pass. He got better at it. Not good, better. Clara learned that care did not have to be quiet to be real. She had always been careful, always gentle, always the one who moved slowly through the world so as not to break it. In the new house, she found that she could be loud sometimes, that she could ask for things directly, that the world did not shatter when she took up more space than she thought she was allowed. Daniel learned that strength could look like staying. He had spent his whole life ready to move, ready to act, ready to do something. He had learned in the forest, in the night, in the moment he had stepped up beside his brother to make a wall around a struggling fire. That staying put was its own kind of courage. That showing up and staying was sometimes the bravest thing a person could do. Sam learned that winter did not last forever. He learned it the morning he woke up and noticed that the light coming through his window was different than it had been the week before. Warmer, longer, full of something that winter light does not have. He pressed his small hand against the glass and felt the difference and knew it the way children know things, completely, immediately, without needing an explanation. He went and found Nora. The light is different, he told her. She looked at the window. She looked at him. Her throat pulled tight with something she could not have named and did not need to. Yes, she said. I think it is. In the evenings they sat together by the window of the room they had been given. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they did not. Sometimes just sitting in the same space was enough. The simple physical fact of being in the same room, breathing the same air, being available to each other without asking anything of each other. They did not talk much about the river. They did not talk much about the longest night in the forest, or the wagon, or the journey south. They did not need to. They had carried those things together, and the carrying had changed the shape of them, all five of them, made them into something that was not the shape they had been before, but was solid in its own way, thick in the places that had cracked, still holding. Sometimes Nora thought about Mr. Solomon, about the knock on the door and the 3 slow taps, and the way he had crouched down to Sam's level in the snow outside the building and said you did not do anything wrong with such complete conviction that even she had believed it a little. She thought about her father, not with the sharp edge that those thoughts had carried at first, the blade of them, the way they had cut into the middle of ordinary moments without warning. She thought about him with something that was softer now, fuller. She thought about the papers he had left with Mr. Solomon. The condition. All 5. Together. He had known winter was coming. He had built them a door before it arrived. Spring came to the settlement in its usual unhurried way, not with a single warm morning that announced itself, with a sequence of small surrenders from a cold, a day when the mud was softer, a morning when birds were audible that had not been heard since autumn, an afternoon when Thomas came inside from working in the yard with his coat open and his face pink from warmth rather than cold, and said it is actually warm out there today, genuinely surprised, as if warmth was something he had stopped expecting. One afternoon in early spring, Nora walked to the edge of the settlement and stood at the top of a low hill looking south. The land below was just beginning to green at the edges, the field showing the first faint color of something coming back to life. The sky was a blue that she had forgotten existed, clear and wide and full of light. She stood there for a long time. She thought about everything they had survived. The knock on the door, the river, the cold walk along the bank, the papers on the table, and the one condition her father had made. The storm on the road, the night in the forest, and the fire that they had made a wall for with their bodies. All the ways Winter had tried to find the gaps between them. All the ways they had refused to leave any. Tell me in the comments. And if you have dealt with something similar, share your story. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. She heard footsteps in the snow behind her. Thomas, then Clara, then Daniel, hands in his pockets, looking at the view with the expression of someone who has decided to like what he sees. Then Sam, who arrived at A, run and inserted himself between Nora and Thomas and immediately took both their hands as if this were simply the correct way to stand on a hill. They stood there together, the five of them, looking at the world below. The fields are beginning to remember green. The sky is enormous and unhurried above them. The sound of water moving somewhere in the distance, no longer threatening, simply present, simply alive. Winter had known their names. It had tried to use them. It had tested every bond between them, pulled at every seam, sent cold into every gap it could find. It had taken something irreplaceable from them and left a wound that would take years to finish becoming a scar. But it had not broken them. It had not separated them. It had asked everything they had and found out, to its own apparent frustration, that what they had was each other, and that that particular thing was not available to be taken. It could only be surrendered, and none of them had surrendered it. Not when a knock came at the door, not at the river, not on the road in the storm, not in the dark of the forest with the fire failing and the wind trying its hardest. Not once. Sam looked up at Nora. His face was warm. His eyes were clear. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked. Nora looked at him. She looked at Thomas, at Clara, at Daniel. At the four faces that she had been watching over and fighting for and breaking down and getting back up for since the morning Winter came to collect what it thought was owed to it. She felt the weight of all of them settle gently into her, not as a burden now, not as a responsibility too large for one person, but as something she was glad to carry, would always be glad to carry, because it was made of them and they were made of each other. "Yes," she said. She meant it completely. "We're going to be okay." Below the hill, the world was warming. Above them, the sky held everything. And Winter, for all its long, cold patience, had finally lost. Some of you listening to this right now are in the middle of your own winter. Not the snow and frost kind. The other kind. The kind that comes when someone leaves without warning. When the person who held your world together is suddenly not there and the world they were holding has to figure out how to stand on its own. The kind of winter that does not care what season it is on the calendar. If that is you right now, I need you to hear what these five children learned. You do not have to be unbreakable. You do not have to be the strongest person in the room. You do not have to have answers to the questions that have no answers. You do not have to stop feeling what you feel or hurry it along or apologize for how long it is taking. You just have to keep moving forward with whoever is beside you. And when the fire goes out, you build a wall with your bodies and you strike the flint again and you keep going until it catches. That is all. That is the whole thing. Winter always ends, and you're still here. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it moved something in you, if it reminded you of something you're carrying or someone you're missing or a winter you survived that you never quite got credit for surviving, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And wherever you are watching from, whatever city, whatever country, whatever room you are sitting in right now, I'm glad you were here for this one. This story traveled to find you for a reason.